It began like so many missing person cases do, with a phone call that didn't feel urgent at first. A young woman from England, 22 years old, traveling alone, hadn't returned messages for over a day. Her friends insisted she always kept in touch. They used words like responsible and trustworthy. I wrote those down because when people vanish, these details matter. Her name was Grace Meline. She had just arrived in Auckland. The last contact anyone had with her was a birthday message she sent to her parents back home. After that, silence. I started where I always do, CCTV. In a city, there's always an electronic eye watching, even when no one notices. We combed through hours of grainy footage, people weaving through the streets, rain-slick sidewalks reflecting the yellow haze of streetlights, strangers brushing past each other with umbrellas half collapsed. I was about to skip ahead when I saw her. Red dress, black jacket, smiling. She was walking beside a man in a black cap. He had his arm around her shoulders in a way that seemed casual, maybe even affectionate. They were talking, leaning into each other as if sharing secrets against the rain. I followed them from camera to camera. From the bar they'd met in, to the street outside, to the City Life Hotel lobby. They stepped inside, and the glass doors slid shut. That was the last anyone saw of her alive. The man's identity surfaced quicker than I expected. Jesse Kempson. We pulled him in before the trail went cold. I still remember the first time he sat across from me in that interview room. The overhead light cast sharp shadows under his eyes, but his posture was loose, almost casual, like he was waiting for a bus. His voice was steady, practiced. He told me they'd met by chance, had a few drinks, and gone back to his hotel room. It was all consensual, he said. Then he claimed she left the next morning while he was still asleep. He leaned back slightly in his chair as he spoke, making sure his hands were visible on the table. No twitching, no stammering, but his eyes were too controlled, too deliberate in how they met mine and then drifted away. What stayed with me was what he didn't do. He didn't ask, is she okay? He didn't ask where she was or why the police were so interested. If you've ever watched guilt play out in real time, you know it often hides behind an overabundance of detail. And when I pushed him, the extra details came spilling out. Useless timelines, irrelevant anecdotes. Details nobody had asked for. That was the moment my gut told me we weren't dealing with an innocent man. We moved into his hotel room next. The place was neat, almost unnervingly so. The curtains were drawn halfway, letting in just a narrow band of pale daylight that stretched across the carpet like a blade. The bed was made. The surfaces were bare. The air felt heavy and stale, the kind of stillness you only notice in a room that's been sealed tight for too long, or in a place where something has gone terribly wrong. The forensic team set to work in silence. Then the lights went out, replaced by the sharp chemical glow of luminol. What had looked spotless under normal light came alive with a ghostly map of violence. Splashes of fluorescent blue flared across the carpet, across the mattress, even faintly along the wall. Tiny arcs and droplets that told a story without words. Blood, invisible to the naked eye, now revealed like constellations no one should ever chart. The pathologist's findings later confirmed my unease. Grace's body bore bruises on her arms, her shoulders, her neck, pressure marks that weren't accidental. They estimated she'd been strangled for 4 to 5 minutes. I've been in this work long enough to know what that means. 4 to 5 minutes of panic, of desperate gasps, of realization. Strangulation isn't quick, it isn't silent, it's personal. The kind of act that requires the killer to be close enough to feel every last struggle. When we pulled his laptop and phone records, the timeline grew darker. While Grace was still alive in that room, he'd been searching for pornography involving choking. Hours later, after she was gone, his search history shifted. How to dispose of a body, suitcase dimensions, the Waitakere ranges, how to clean blood from carpet, what decomposition smells like. It was all there, neatly timestamped, like a checklist he thought no one would ever read. The CCTV filled in the final pieces. At exactly 8:01 a.m., he left the hotel. Same black cap, same white sneakers. But this time, he was pulling a large suitcase behind him. The lobby's microphones don't record sound, but in my head, I can hear it. The hollow click of the suitcase wheels on tile, the faint hum of the automatic doors opening, the sigh of morning air rushing in. He rolled it straight to the curb, opened the trunk of a rental car, and with one motion heaved it inside. Then he got behind the wheel and drove out of the city, disappearing into the sprawl of highways that lead toward the forest. I didn't know then just how far that suitcase had to travel before it stopped for good, but I knew enough to be certain. Grace Meline never walked out of that hotel on her own. It took days, but we found her. The suitcase was buried in a shallow grave in the Waitakere Ranges, the earth damp from recent rain. Leaves clung to the zipper. When we unzipped it, she was curled inside, knees drawn up, still in the clothes from her birthday. Her skin was cold, her hair matted. She looked impossibly small. I went back to him in the interview room, told him we'd found her. He barely reacted, said it was an accident, said she had asked for what had happened, that it had gone too far. His words hung in the air like something rotten. I remember the bruising, the searches, the suitcase, the lies. At the trial, her parents came to New Zealand. They sat in the front row every day. Her mother spoke in court, her voice shaking as she described the loss. "You have taken my sunshine," she said to him. The room was silent except for her voice. I kept my eyes on the table. I didn't want him to see whatever was on my face. The jury took less than a day to convict him of murder. The judge spoke of cruelty, callousness, and betrayal of trust. The sentence was life in prison with a minimum of 17 years before parole. People in the public gallery clapped when it was over. I didn't. There was nothing to celebrate. Grace was still gone. Some nights I walk past the City Life Hotel. The lobby lights are always on, casting the same pale glow across the glass doors. I see the elevator in my mind. The way she stepped inside beside him, her trust still intact. I see the doors close, and then I see him, calm, smiling, already knowing how the night would end. I keep a still frame from the CCTV on my desk, the moment just before they entered the hotel. It's not for evidence anymore. It's a reminder that monsters don't always come in the dark. Sometimes they walk beside you under streetlights, speaking gently, making you laugh. And you don't realize what they are until the door closes and there's no way out. One of my earliest memories as a child was being taken to a hunting log cabin and spending the weekend hunting game with my father. This had been a Hamilton family tradition for generations. Throughout my childhood and adolescent years, whenever hunting season came around, my father would take me out to our family cabin to go hunting. He always reminded me to cherish and carry on this tradition, as he told me that this was the same cabin his father had taken him to, and he hoped I would one day take my own son on a hunting trip to that very same cabin during open season. I really tried my best to carry on the family tradition after I got married to the love of my life, Lucy. However, we'd been blessed with two beautiful girls, and while I loved them more than anything in the world, I knew full well that my young daughters wouldn't be too keen on going hunting with me to kill some bucks or hares during hunting season. They often tagged along when they were younger because they loved staying at the family's log cabin, but as they grew older, their interests shifted to much more feminine things, and it wasn't long before I eventually found myself carrying out the Hamilton family tradition alone. I'm not going to lie, I was a bit saddened by this development. Even though I'd seen it coming since the day they were born, I didn't think they'd lose interest in spending the hunting trip at the family cabin so quickly. That said, I also wasn't the type of father to force his children to do things they didn't want to do, even if it was a long-cherished family tradition I'd hoped to pass on to them someday. I'd always allowed my kids to freely explore their own interests without making them feel guilty for not wanting to continue a decades-long family hunting tradition that I always wanted to honor. And even though it was hard at first, I'd already come to terms with it. When hunting season came around again in the late fall, I cleaned our family's cherished .30-06 Springfield rifle, the same one my father used during our hunting trips together, as it had been passed down for generations. I then packed the car for a solo trip the next day, loading my scope, hunting gear, and warm clothes. Lucy and the girls had planned a weekend ski trip that November, and they'd begged me to come along. I politely declined and told them that I had to keep up the Hamilton family tradition. As they were leaving for their all-girls ski trip, I kissed my wife, hugged my daughters, and told them I hoped they had a really great time skiing. After my wife and daughters left for the ski resort, I made my way down to our family's old hunting log cabin early the next morning. Once I arrived, I put all my hunting gear together and headed out into the woods to hunt. Several other hunters were already in the area with their families. Most of them were camping nearby with their kids and wives, while the others who didn't bring tents stayed in the nearby hunting cabins. I wanted to be alone, so I took my gear and went deeper into the woods. It was still buck season, and everyone was hoping to get a large, black-tailed buck. But elk season had just started, and I was hoping to be the first to catch a big Roosevelt elk. After setting up my rifle, I waited patiently for something good to cross my scope. But as time passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I'd hunted this forest more times than I could count. Ever since I first came here with my father as a boy, I'd grown to know it well, and I could tell something was off. For some unexplainable reason, the forest was eerily quiet. The absence of nature's familiar sounds threw me off. I knew it could get quiet during the season, but this felt different. Things were a bit too quiet, and it seemed like the forest had gone silent out of fear. A sense of unease slowly welled up in my stomach, and my hands began to sweat. I tried to put my mind at ease by telling myself I probably felt this way because I was lonely and missed my wife and kids. However, just as I managed to calm myself down, I heard a gut-wrenching scream echo through the forest. The sound was so terrifying that I clutched my rifle and pointed it in fear. I couldn't tell if the scream belonged to a human or an animal, but I knew without a doubt that it was the reason the forest had gone quiet. I quickly reached for my phone to record the scream, knowing no one would believe me if I simply told them what I'd heard. After recording a short clip, I packed my gear to leave, but my feet wouldn't move. I remained frozen in place because I could feel in my gut that the screaming creature was close by now, and it was watching me. I knew that moving even an inch might cause it to attack, so with no other options, I brought out my rifle and waited. It was already late in the evening, and I hoped I'd be able to confront it before it got dark. But the creature had other plans. It kept screaming for several hours, just to let me know it was still there, circling me. It was nearly impossible to pinpoint its exact location, as it sounded like the screams were coming from every direction. This went on until I was surrounded by nothing but pitch darkness, and then suddenly, everything went deathly quiet. It attacked in an instant. I fired my rifle, but it was too fast, and within seconds, it was on top of me. It took me a few seconds to register what this creature was, but it seemed like I'd been attacked by a massive, rabid human. I couldn't tell whether it was a man or a woman. The large arms that pinned me down felt like they belonged to a man, but I could also see long hair in the dark, which made my attacker look like it had the head of a woman. Words can't describe how I felt in that moment, as I fought relentlessly against this thing that I still wasn't entirely sure was even a human being. I know this is going to sound completely crazy, but as I fought back against my assailant in the dark, I got a few quick glimpses of the person's face, and for some reason, he or she looked anthropomorphic. I initially thought I'd hit my head so hard when I was thrown on the floor and was now seeing things that weren't there, but I could have sworn that my crazed attacker sometimes had the face of a bear before morphing their appearance to look like an elk. I didn't know what was going on, and my mind couldn't comprehend what my eyes were seeing, but all I knew for certain was that I had to fight for my life so that I could go back home and see my wife, Lucy, and my 2 daughters. We struggled for what seemed like an eternity before the person held me down and attempted to rip out my neck with their teeth, but I managed to quickly retrieve my hunting knife from my pocket, and I stabbed it into the stomach without hesitation. My attacker screamed so loud that my ears hurt, and I wondered how a normal person could make those otherworldly screeching sounds with their vocal cords. It was hurt now, and it jumped right off and ran back into the woods as I fired at it again. There were several bloody scratches and bleeding cuts on my body, as the person had managed to use their long nails to badly injure me during the fight, but I was alive. It took me a few seconds to regain my composure, but I immediately ran toward the nearby campsite to warn the camping families of the violent person who was roaming these woods. However, when I finally reached the campgrounds, I was greeted by a truly horrific sight. The throats of all the campers had been torn out. There was now a mountain of corpses. Men, women, and children lay scattered on the ground, and several parts of their faces, nose, and ears were missing, as it looked like whatever had attacked the site had bitten them off. Again, this ghastly scene didn't look like the work of an animal, as it really did seem like a deranged large man had somehow attacked a site full of armed hunters. Even though I was seeing it with my own eyes, I found it extremely hard to believe, as I didn't know how this was possible. But the attacker had also managed to rip out the throats of the men, all while biting off the noses, ears, and faces of their wives and children using only his teeth. I was able to get a signal now, so I immediately called the authorities. It took some time for them to arrive. I was questioned and I told them everything that had happened, even though I knew the officers would have a hard time believing me. After inspecting the scene, the officers came to a similar conclusion as mine. It was clear to see that the bite marks were very human-like, but the investigators couldn't decipher how it was possible, as no normal human had the jaw strength or the adequate teeth size to cleanly rip out people's throats. Some investigators believed it was done by multiple deranged individuals, while other detectives said that despite initial assumptions that the attack was carried out by a human man, further examination showed they might have been killed by a group of mountain lions. Despite all the theories, no one could decide what truly happened that night, and the cannibalistic person who committed the horrors, or the supposed animals that carried out the attack, was never found. The whole horrific ordeal really opened my eyes because, for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be hunted, and it was truly a terrifying experience. I remember hugging my wife and daughters when I finally got back, and when hunting season came around the next year, I left my rifle in storage and went skiing with my family. Due to the things I'd seen, I decided it was finally time to leave some traditions in the past, and that skiing trip was the start of a new Hamilton family tradition. The story you just heard was based on some disturbing video footage captured by an unidentified hunter in 2023 while hunting in Mount Hood National Forest, Oregon. The screams seemed to be coming from all directions, with no animal in sight. There were also undisclosed records of a gruesome attack at a nearby campsite on the same day the footage was taken. After a thorough examination, wildlife experts believed that the sounds and attack were carried out by mountain lions. However, many other specialists believed both the screams and attacks were done by a person or a creature that still hasn't been identified. Despite the authorities' best efforts, this perplexing case remains unsolved to this very day.
I once came across a saying that went, "The biggest dreams are found and made on the streets of Los Angeles." I used to obsess over this quote in my early 20s, as I'd convinced myself that the only way I'd ever achieve my dreams was if I moved to Los Angeles. My obsession with the city of dreams continued to grow over time, and it wasn't long before I eventually caved and moved there to chase my big dreams. Everything was fine at first, but unfortunately, I soon realized how wrong I was, as the only thing I found in LA were horrific nightmares. The tragic tale you're about to hear will explain why. I moved to the city of Los Angeles when I was 23 years old. I can still remember every single detail of that day, as I thought moving there would be the start of a beautiful time in my life. I lived with my childhood friend, a girl named Vicky, and we would always stay up all night talking about our dreams and the things we wanted to accomplish in the city. Vicky was a proper LA girl, as she moved there when she was 9 after her father had gotten a job opportunity in the city. Our mothers were best friends, and we pretty much grew up together as we'd known each other since we were 2. We'd managed to keep in contact over the years, even after she moved, and I remember how ecstatic Vicky was when I told her that I was planning on moving to LA. My first few months in LA went pretty well, as Vicky really helped me to quickly settle in, having lived there for most of her life. I really don't know how I would have survived without her, as she'd integrated me into her friend group and even showed me all the best places to eat and shop. After living with Vicky for a while, I realized that she was pretty well known around her area, as the locals had given her the nickname, the Party Queen. She'd told me that she'd gotten this nickname because she always managed to get invites to the best parties in LA. Her nickname didn't come as a surprise to me, as Vicky loved to party and live her life to the fullest ever since we were little. She also used these parties as a tool to grow her social connections, as Vicky wanted to be an actress when she finished school, and she knew the people she met and the connections she made during these parties could help her achieve her dream of acting. Vicky often took me along whenever she needed a +1 to the parties she'd gotten invited to. I experienced some of the best moments of my life at the LA parties that I attended with Vicky, as we'd always had a great time together. However, while I didn't know it at the time, the parties that I loved going to would eventually lead me to a horrific experience that would scar me for life, and it all began when Vicky managed to get invited to one of the most exclusive parties in Hollywood. I can still recall the excitement on Vicky's face that fateful morning when she told me about the invite. She said she'd moved heaven and earth to get us into the best and most exclusive party of the year. I asked who was hosting the party, and Vicky looked at me with a wide grin on her face as she said the name, Mr. Combs. I was speechless at first, as I couldn't believe the words that had just come out of her mouth. The reputation of these infamous parties hosted by Mr. Sean Combs, who's popularly known as Puff Daddy, preceded them, as everyone knew they were some of the wildest parties ever thrown in LA and across the United States. I didn't know how she got an invite, as it was nearly impossible to get one. But Vicky said it was a friend of a friend who worked for him that managed to get her in. After the excitement of being invited had simmered down, we spent the whole day getting ready for the party that night. I can still recall the smile on Vicky's face as she said, "This is going to be one of the best nights of our lives, and I'm sure it's going to be a Hollywood story that we'll remember forever." The party was held at Mr. Combs' Los Angeles mansion, which was located in the Homely Hills neighborhood on South Mapleton Drive. It started at 9:30 p.m., but Vicky and I had arrived at 10:30 p.m. Before we were allowed to enter, the man at the door told us to hand over our phones, as the taking of any photos or videos without Mr. Combs' consent was prohibited. I didn't see anything wrong with this, as I assumed it was due to the alarming amount of high-profile guests and A-list celebrities that were attending. After we'd given them our phones, we were then given a piece of paper to sign. I didn't know what it was at first, but I soon realized that it was a non-disclosure agreement. Vicky quickly signed hers and asked me to sign mine so we could get inside, but I was a bit hesitant. There were certain details of the NDA that I found strange, particularly the one that said the NDA was in effect for the entire life of the signee plus 20 years after their death. I wondered what could be going on behind those doors that we couldn't talk about for the rest of our lives. I started getting nervous, but Vicky calmed me down, saying that this was just the standard at these types of parties. I knew we couldn't turn back now, and I also knew how hard it was for Vicky to get us invited, so I didn't want to ruin the night for her. The man at the door was already giving me a strange look, and I knew I didn't have much time left to make up my mind. So I put all my fears aside and convinced myself to sign it. Once we signed, we were quickly ushered into the lavish mansion. It all felt surreal, and I couldn't believe I'd made it to a Diddy party after just a few months of living in LA. Only a few minutes had passed before I finally saw Mr. Combs. He walked up to us, and after we exchanged pleasantries, he told us that we weren't meant to be partying with anyone else in the main room, as we were special guests and we were supposed to be in the VIP room. I was confused as I wondered what he meant by special guests. That's when he took us to a secluded room in the mansion, and as he opened the door to usher us in, my heart dropped to my stomach. The room we were told to enter was some sort of BDSM-themed sex dungeon. My mind couldn't handle it all, as some of the most vile, sadistic, and masochistic sexual acts were being performed in every corner of the room. I saw several women hanging naked from the ceiling. Some of them had needles sticking out of their bodies, while others were bleeding while participating in sexual acts. I'd heard about hematoglypnia, or blood play, which is a fetish where people are sexually aroused by blood, but I'd never seen it carried out before, and it horrified me. This was just a fraction of what was going on in that room. The more I looked, the worse it got. Several people around the room were participating in even more disturbing sexual acts like scat play, which involved the use of feces, extreme sexual asphyxiation, and electrostimulation, just to name a few. I can't even properly describe some of the extreme scenes I witnessed in that room, as they are far too graphic to repeat. I recognized some of the male and female celebrities who were participating in these extreme sexual acts. There were some of the biggest stars in Hollywood there, but I can't bring myself to mention any of their names. After showing us around, Mr. Combs then proceeded to coerce both me and Vicky to participate in these disturbing sexual acts with several other women. We wanted to leave at that point, but we soon realized that we wouldn't be able to, as Mr. Combs and a few of his celebrity friends were very coercive, and I knew they weren't going to stop until they'd managed to convince us. I remember how Mr. Combs, his eyes bloodshot red from all the drinking, coerced Vicky into participating by saying, Nah, playgirl, we just getting started, and we won't stop, can't stop. Come on, baby, this is your key into Hollywood, and I know you're not stupid enough to give this up. You don't want to leave now? This was probably the worst mistake of our lives, but we were young and eventually caved under the pressure. Just like the many other women there, we allowed Mr. Combs and his celebrity friends to have their way with us. I don't know how long it all lasted, but right when I thought it was over, things got much worse. Mr. Combs said he'd saved the best part of the night for last, as he informed everyone that we were about to carry out an exclusive Diddy Party BDSM act called the Piñata. The Piñata was apparently an extreme form of BDSM spanking or impact play. The men were given wooden bats padded with cotton, and a woman who was tied up was then placed in a circle while Combs and his friends violently whacked her around the room using the padded bats, as if she were a piñata. They'd managed to get several women to participate in this disturbing act, and unfortunately, one of them was Vicky. Vicky hadn't realized what she'd signed up for, and I can still remember the terror in her eyes when it started. She eventually began to scream, saying she didn't want to do it anymore, but Combs and his friends didn't care.
Dance, bitch, and sing
As they all just kept hitting her around the room.
That's what I'm talking about. Who got the Johnson & Johnson?
It wasn't long before she couldn't take it anymore, and I watched in horror as Vicky collapsed. I rushed to her side and noticed she wasn't moving. Mr. Combs then told everyone to clear the room, saying he would get her some help. I can never forget how excruciatingly bad I felt as Vicky's motionless body was then taken out through the back, because Mr. Combs didn't want to alarm the guests partying upstairs. I tried to go with her as I didn't want to leave her side, but Mr. Combs didn't allow it. He told me he would handle it personally and assured me that Vicky would reach out to me the next day when she was feeling better. But unfortunately, that was the last time I ever saw Vicky alive. When I didn't hear from Vicky the next day, I endlessly tried reaching out to Mr. Combs to find out what happened to my friend, but he never gave me a straightforward answer. Not long after, Vicky's family started calling and asking about her whereabouts. At this point, I told Mr. Combs that I'd have to tell her family and the police the truth, but he reminded me of the NDA I signed and threatened me with violence and imprisonment for defamation if I ever talked. Mr. Combs told me to tell Vicky's family that she'd run away and skipped town, or else the same thing that happened to her would happen to me. Lying to Vicky's family was the worst thing I'd ever done in my life, but I was completely terrified and knew I had no choice. Vicky's family eventually reported her as a missing person when they never heard back from her, but despite several efforts from the authorities, the police were never able to find her. The story you just heard was anonymously shared by a woman using the alias Catherine. Numerous efforts made by the authorities to uncover the woman's real identity and to verify these claims have proved fruitless, as there was no possible way of tracing the tragic story back to her. With the many recent atrocities that have surfaced against Mr. Sean John Combs, widely known as Puff Daddy or P. Diddy, the authorities are currently trying to uncover the entire truth behind the unspeakable acts that took place at Mr. Combs' freak-off parties, in addition to his white parties. Investigators believe they have only just scratched the surface of the horrors Mr. Combs committed at these events, and they hope to bring justice to all affected parties at the end of the investigation.
I had been living in the apartment for 2 months. It wasn't great, but the rent was cheap, and I didn't mind the occasional cockroach in the hallway. It was just me, my job, and an old TV that barely worked. Nights were quiet, almost too quiet. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps in the hallway past midnight, but it was a shitty building. People came and went at all hours. One night I came home late. Work had been exhausting, and all I wanted to do was pass out in my bed. As I turned the key, I noticed the door was unlocked. I was sure I locked it. A small detail, but not enough to put me on edge. I pushed it open slowly. The apartment looked normal. Nothing was missing. Nothing was out of place. Maybe I was just too tired to remember locking it. I shrugged it off. I should have checked the entire place. I should have looked under the bed, inside the closet. But I didn't. I went to sleep like nothing happened. The next morning I found something strange. The fridge was open. Not wide, just slightly enough to see the light flickering inside. I never left the fridge open. I lived alone. Nobody else had a key. I closed it, telling myself I was being paranoid. That night I sat on my couch, scrolling on my phone. When I heard it, a faint creak. My bedroom door. It was open. I was sure I left it closed. I stared at it, my heart pounding. Maybe the wind. Maybe I had left the window open. I got up slowly, walking towards it. The doorframe was empty. No one there. I stepped inside and turned on the light. Nothing. Everything looked the same. My bed, my dresser, my closet. The closet. The door was slightly open. A thin, black gap staring at me. I didn't move. I could barely breathe. I reached out, fingers trembling, and I pulled the closet door open. Nothing. Just my clothes, my shoes, and an old backpack. My pulse was racing. I forced out a laugh. I was letting my imagination get to me. I turned back to my bed. Then the closet door moved. A slow, deliberate shift, like something inside had adjusted itself. My stomach twisted. I stepped back, my body frozen between running and investigating. Then I heard it. A sound so faint I almost missed it. A breath. A slow, rasping inhale. Sweat broke down on my skin. The air felt thick, pressing down on me. I couldn't move. My body refused. Something was inside that closet. Not just my paranoia. Something alive. And it was watching me. I ran. I didn't think. I just bolted out of my apartment, down the hallway into the street. I stood there, shaking, staring out my window. No one came out. No sound followed me. I felt stupid. Ridiculous. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I was just losing it. But deep down, I knew. I convinced myself to go back. I had nowhere else to go. Maybe it was just a fluke. I walked inside, checking every room, every corner. I even knocked at the closet door like an idiot. Nothing. The apartment was empty. I locked everything, double-checked. Then I sat on my bed, staring at the closet. I kept the light on. Hours passed. My eyelids grew heavier. I was about to drift off when I heard it. A whisper. My name. My blood turned to ice. It came from the closet. The door was closed, but I heard it. A raspy, deliberate whisper. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find. A lamp. My hands shook as I stepped closer. I was done being scared. I kicked the door open, and there he was. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. He was grinning, teeth yellowed, eyes dark and empty, He didn't speak, he just moved fast, a blur of limbs and filthy clothes. I tried to swing the lamp. He caught my wrist. His grip was like iron. He yanked me forward, slamming me against the dresser. Pain shot through my ribs. His breath was rancid, his skin slick with sweat. I gasped for air, struggling. He pinned me down, one knee pressing into my chest, his free hand reaching for his pocket. Something glinted, a knife, long, serrated. I thrashed, kicking wildly. His grip loosened for a second. I managed to twist free, crawling towards the door. He grabbed my ankle, yanking me back. I crawled at the floor, nails scraping uselessly. I kicked back with all my strength. My foot connected with his face, a wet crunch. He snarled, but didn't let go. His knife slashed out, missing me by inches. I twisted, grabbed a shard of glass from the broken lamp, and stabbed him into his arm. He screamed, jerking back. Blood splattered on the floor. I scrambled, running to the door. My fingers fumbled with the lock. He was behind me. I could hear him breathing, heavy, furious. The door finally gave. I stumbled into the hallway, sprinting down the stairs. My chest burnt. My legs screamed. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I hit the lobby, yanking the front door open. Cold air filled my lungs. I ran into the street, waving at a passing car. It didn't stop. I turned, expecting him to be right there. But he wasn't. I stared at the building. The entrance was empty. He was gone. The police didn't believe me at first. No signs of forced entry, nothing stolen, just some scratches on my neck and a broken lamp. But when they searched my apartment, they found it. A hole, hidden behind loose panels in my closet. Inside, they found clothes, food wrappers, and a knife. He had been living there, watching me, listening. They never caught him. He disappeared. Maybe he found someone else. Maybe he's still out there, waiting. I moved out the next day, but sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake up thinking I hear it again, whispering my name. This story is based on infamous crimes committed by Richard Ramirez, also known as the Night Stalker. Between 1984 and 1985, Ramirez terrorized Southern California with a series of brutal murders, sexual assaults, and burglaries. Ramirez's modus operandi involved breaking into homes at night, attacking his victims, and then escaping into the darkness. His crimes were marked by sadistic violence, and he often left disturbing symbols like pentagrams at crime scenes, further fueling the media frenzy and public fear.